Hi, we are live now. I will just request my team, Sukanya, to just make sure we are live fine. And once we are fine, we are good to go. Right. Hi, everyone. So we have the nod. We are live. So if it's okay with the moderator, we can commence the session.
Thank you, Yogita. Yeah, I think we are good to go.
Right.
And I'm sure more will join shortly.
Yeah.
So a very good morning to all of you. And for those who are in the Far East region, good afternoon. And those who are attending from the United States and other parts of the world, good evening. At the outset, I would like to thank the convener for giving me the opportunity to be part of this important session as a moderator. To begin with, I would just like to use a few minutes to show a few slides to kind of set the scene for the day. And in the process, I will also introduce our panelists for the day. Yeah, I'll just share the screen now. I hope you all can see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah. So we are on a session on health, safety, and environment. And as Yogita has already shared in the opening of the symposium, we have problem statements identified for each of the sectors. So the problem statement for this particular session is advanced analytics-based energy efficiency management and judicious formulation of policies and implementation of technologies and other means for achieving the targets of GHG emissions by 2030 and 2050. Of course, our focus largely would be on current globally implemented energy efficiency and emission models, how they are being used, and what India will do to adapt the models for Indian ports. So our focus would be on the Indian ports, and I'll share with you a while later why we felt that it will be important to go with the focus on Indian ports. To begin with, I'll take the opportunity of introducing our panelists for the day. Dr. J. Acharya, he's a MSc in Maritime Studies from NTU, Singapore, and he has also completed his PhD with research in ship emissions. He is the principal consultant for International Maritime Management and Consultancy, and also an adjunct professor with University of Tehran, and also the director of International Ocean Institute. We have Mr. Sanjay Verma, who is the Director of Decarbonization Solutions at Wärtsilä, where he has been since the year 1999. So he brings in valuable experience of a large organization which is doing immense work in the area of decarbonization. We have Captain Anuj Chopra, who is the co-founder and CEO of ESG Plus. He's joining us from Houston. He is also the adjunct professor of University of Houston. He had earlier been the Vice President Americas for RightShips and also the President of Anglo-Eastern Group in the United States. And of course, we have Mr. P. Jairaj Kumar, who is the Chairman and Managing Director of Ocean Sparkle Limited. It's a company which has been involved in managing, looking after port services in India for many, many years now. They own a large number of vessels which are operating in various ports in India and also some overseas ports. So all in all, ladies and gentlemen, we have a panel of people from diverse backgrounds, but for our discussion today, they'll be actually complementing each other for us to be able to bring out a holistic picture of the problem statement in hand. And of course, Dr. Ananta Subramaniam is my senior colleague, who's also the assimilator for this session. He's a naval architect, and he retired as a professor with IIT Chennai and in the Department of Ocean Engineering. So he brings in valuable academic background as well as knowledge about ships, design of ships, and so on and so forth. Before I begin, I would just like to share a very short video with all of you. It'll just take about 2 minutes. Some of you may have seen it, but probably this will set the tone for our discussion today.
Human activities, from pollution to overpopulation, are driving up the Earth's temperature and fundamentally changing the world around us. The main cause is a phenomenon known as the greenhouse effect. Gases in the atmosphere, such as water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, let the sun's light in, but keep some of the heat from escaping, like the glass walls of a greenhouse. The more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the more heat gets trapped, strengthening the greenhouse effect and increasing the Earth's temperature. Human activities, like the burning of fossil fuels, have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by more than 1/3 since the Industrial Revolution. The rapid increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has warmed the planet at an alarming rate. While Earth's climate has fluctuated in the past, atmospheric carbon dioxide hasn't reached today's levels in hundreds of thousands of years. Climate change has consequences for our oceans, our weather, our food sources, and our health. Ice sheets, such as Greenland and Antarctica, are melting. The extra water that was once held in glaciers causes sea levels to rise and spills out of the oceans, flooding coastal regions. Warmer temperatures also make weather more extreme. This means not only more intense major storms, floods, and heavy snowfall, but also longer and more frequent droughts. These changes in weather pose challenges. Growing crops becomes more difficult. The areas where plants and animals can live shift, and water supplies are diminished. In addition to creating new agricultural challenges, climate change can directly affect people's physical health. In urban areas, the warmer atmosphere creates an environment that traps and increases the amount of smog. This is because smog contains ozone particles, which increase rapidly at higher temperatures. Exposure to higher levels of smog can cause health problems such as asthma, heart disease, and lung cancer. While the rapid rate of climate change is caused by humans, humans are also the ones who can combat it. If we work to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources like solar and wind, which don't produce greenhouse gas emissions, we might still be able to prevent some of the worst effects of climate change.
Okay, to the short video, there are many such available, but they do give us an idea of the seriousness of the situation that is around us. So taking on from here, what we intend doing today is to discuss our problem statement in the sense that when I said earlier that we don't just talk about shipping, but we are also looking at ports. IMO, as we all are aware, does not have a direct role to play in regulating the ports. And when we talk about in the Indian context, if we need to look at what we have stated in the Maritime India vision earlier this year of how we want to reduce the pollution and effects of GHG in the coming future, then looking at just shipping is not going to find solutions for us, because ports is where there is a concentration of polluting sources. So we are looking at ports. While our context of discussion today may be India, but we will be tapping on best practices which are prevalent globally. And this is where some of our panelists like Captain Anuj Chopra, who has been in the United States for many, many years, Dr. Jay Acharya, who is based in Singapore, and of course, Mr. Sanjay Verma, who probably has visited the entire globe, in connection with the work that he does. They'll be able to share best practices which are prevalent, and we need to see how we can adapt some of them for finding solutions for ourselves. So with this, we would begin our discussion today. We have just seen this video. I would also like to ask the panelists, what is your experience of the awareness which is existing around about the seriousness that we are talking about? Maybe we'll start with Captain Anuj Chopra. I'll request him to share what are his observations with regards to the awareness which is existing around.
Thank you so much, Pawan. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thank you for this opportunity and to part of this August panel. So on the greenhouse gas emissions, and as you rightly pointed out, there are perhaps two direct impacts. One is towards climate change, the other is towards health. The health element of it has been there for some time in the Western world and is very closely monitored, and there's a huge amount of awareness in that space and action is being taken. The climate change side of it is still lagging, and it depends on the industry and the nature of the industry, the nature of local legislation, which then controls it. In the United States at the moment, all the major ports are required to hold an inventory of all their emissions, and then they're putting strategies to reduce that. And that's not only within the US, but it's sort of in Europe or in the Western world or developed world, working very closely to other parts in the world. So these are the two aspects on the awareness aspect. Talking about awareness, I think it'll be worth noting that today, NOAA, the US government National Oceanic Administration, released a study on ocean rise, where it's very accurately predicted. It's been measured over the last few years and very accurately predicted the ocean rise for the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years to the end of the century. And those numbers are alarming because that would explain to us what would happen to the coastal regions where nearly half the population of the world lives. So these are all important factors for us to be aware, and they're going to have a huge impact on the way we live in this global village. Thank you.
You're muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
My apologies. Anuj, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is while the awareness on health is pretty much there, about the climate change and global warming is something still people know about it, but probably the seriousness may not yet be there. Am I right on that?
You're absolutely right. So global warming is perhaps not a correct terminology, because I still remember when first time it was politically released on a global basis, US had one of the coldest days. And there was a joke that how come there's global warming if it's so cold? So really it's climate change is a much more accurate term, where if it's hot, it's hotter. If it's cold, it's colder. If it's raining, it's more rain. If it's drought, it's more drought. It's like the atmospheric phenomena of weather is on steroids. And that's perhaps the best way to explain that. And that is, climate change has become a political word around the globe. And countries have adopted it, but still there are a significant amount of naysayers who do not believe that it exists.
Yeah, probably it's also because it is very subtle, I mean, these changes happen over a certain period of time, which are not so evident on daily basis. And that's the reason why, we tend to ignore them. probably.
Very well said. You're absolutely right, though I wouldn't agree with that. I can give you local statistics. You're in Mumbai or in Maharashtra, and in Mumbai's had much more flooding in the last 10 years than it had in the previous 10 years. I have the same story for Houston. I can name you 10 other places, high population centers, where it's the same. So we have seen a significant change in the last 10 years. It's for us to recognize that change, analyze it, and act accordingly.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Anuj. Let me, after having a global perspective, Sanjay, you would like to share something. Let's hear you out, and then we come to Jairaj. Yeah.
So when you look at air pollution or emissions, there are two parts. One is a local and one is the global. And the local, when we talk about the smog, we talk about particles in the air, we talk about NOx and SOx, which is a very visible kind of an emission. Whereas when you talk about GHG, it's invisible, but it has a global impact. So visible ones gets known, or people are much more aware of that. When they see smog, they say, oh, such a dirty air. But when there is more carbon dioxide in the air, nobody knows that there is more carbon dioxide, but it has an impact, which again, as you rightly said, very gradual, but it is happening. And also because it's happening maybe in areas which are low-lying, So maybe these island states which are very close to the sea, so they will not exist, but we don't see that. It's far away, thousands of miles away from us. So we don't know about it. Of late, because of media, because of social media, we are becoming more and more aware of these things. But I would still say the local emission and the local emission, that impact of that emission has a very visible, and people are aware, but GHG is by social media, by knowledge, then people are getting aware, or those living close to the sea are directly getting affected. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Sanjay. Okay, since we are on the global perspective, let's then hear first Dr. Jay Acharya, because he's been in Singapore for a long time, and then I'll come back to Jairaj for you to give us some Indian perspective here. Yeah, Jay, what do you think about in Singapore and other places that you are associated closely with? How's the awareness in general about the seriousness of the situation?
Thank you very much, Pawan, first of all. My sincere thanks to the conveners, organizers, and glad to hear the panel members there also. And regarding coming to global issues, I've been associated with this subject for almost about 10 years. And when you read the papers which were published late 90s and early 90s till 2010 or 2012 or rather 2014, most of the papers were writing specifically that whatever emissions are being calculated or assessed, they always used to write that uncertain. Always used to write that all these predictions are uncertain because of lack of data, lack of resources, and lack of even measurements, technology. After 2014, it rather became a very in-depth research matter. And then around that time, the drones were used for taking sampling. And even now, the drones which you are getting, they analyze on the spot, live, and they are sent to the laboratory. So the accuracy level of the measurements and assessments come quite closer. And now, if you see the recent literature, you will find that you hardly find that data are uncertain or too much of approximations are used. And that came specifically when the vessels movement on the activity wise started, taking into the account before early 2019. They used to just take care of the fuel consumption, how many tons of the fuel has been consumed, and on that basis they used to use the formula and come out with whether it is GHG, whether it is SOx, NOx, or PM 2.5 or PM 10. But with these activity-based formulas, it became quite accurate. So now if we come to the Southeast Asia, East Asia, Australia, Asia Pacific region, and of course South Asia side, South Asia hardly has got any sort of proactive measurements or assessment of emissions, but Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific region have been proactive. Awareness is there. The research universities as well as government level funding has been quite, generously being paid to come out with the emission factors, emission calculations, and inventory, which is very important because you can have, if you have the inventory when you start from first step, you can only move if you have the past records, where we were, where we are now, and where we want to be. If you see the papers recently published, as well as the conclusions which has been arrived, the emission of the ship, 55 to 77% emissions are found around the port facility, vicinity. So the most affected areas of the emissions are actually port, surrounding around the port, and of course oceans. Oceans are definitely affected, whether it is greenhouse gas or other pollutants.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for the input. So if I understand correctly from you, the awareness in general has grown. There is more solid information to back that the matter is serious and that needs to be looked into. Jairaj, since you operate in large number of Indian ports, and our topic of the day is what we can do about reducing the GHG emissions and other pollutants in the Indian context. How do you find in general the awareness levels in the Indian context, in ports with various entities and so on and so forth?
Thanks, Pawan. Thank you for the generous introduction, and welcome to all the panelists and also the participants. As you're aware, and you rightly pointed out, IM only speaks about the reduction of GHG emissions from ships. Although member states have adopted the MEPC 74 resolution, which encourages voluntary cooperation between ports and the shipping sector to contribute to reducing GHG emissions from ships. It doesn't talk about ports also. So they're only concerned about ships. And they have identified 4 possible areas of interest, which I will speak later, right? So in terms of awareness in the port segment in India and in the few ports that we operate internationally, we know that something has been signed, but nobody knows what actually the measurable details are and what are we supposed to. I mean, ports are equal culprits. If you talk about ships, ports are also equally this thing in polluting GHG gas emissions. I would go on to say that even our efforts to go green in a small way in LNG terminals in India have not met with equal response from the port developers. We operate tugs in 3 LNG terminals in India, and our efforts to convert these tugs to use LNG as fuel has not met with an encouraging response, where the only criteria here in selecting an operator is the lowest in the tender. And as we all know that, constructing an LNG vessel is much more expensive than constructing a traditional AST tugboat. And if we were to take on that expense, we would not be the lowest in the tender. So somehow we are actually sandwiched between two entities. One is the port, who does not, realize that they are also equally responsible. And on the other side, we see that banks and financial institutions, venture capitalists have turned on the screws onto operators like us to say that if you are not going to go green, we are not going to fund you. So in effect, we are actually being sandwiched, and I really hope that this awareness comes about. I'm sure Government of India has been a signatory to this resolution, and also they have made commitments in the COP26. There are a lot of areas where ports can by themselves help in reduction of GHG gases, and also, of course, support shipping sector as well to reduce the emissions. But there is a lot to go. I'm not speaking only about Indian ports. I'm also talking about ports which we operate internationally in the Gulf. We've operated in Sri Lanka. There is absolutely no concern as of the moment of time.
Yeah, thank you, Jaraj. I mean, it's really a very important input that you have provided. I mean, what I can pick from what you just said is that forget about at the operational level, where people who operate in ports, they may not be very aware of what we are talking about. But even at the policy level, at the highest level, there is still a lot that needs to be done, which will finally be driven down then. So that brings us to our second segment of our discussion, policies. And let me first get Anuj to share something with us. What is his experience now that he operates a company called ESG Plus in the United States, and his past experience with ride ships, etc. And of course, the fact that he is living there for so long. How are the policies being looked into with the seriousness of the situation that we see in front of us? Anuj, would you like to share something here, please?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pawan. So I would still like to reiterate that we live in a global village. A very nice example is, which was very closely watched, was the tsunami and the Fukushima radioactive cloud release. That cloud of radioactivity from Japan was tracked around the globe. And within 48 hours, it had already reached around the globe. Within 1 week, it was sort of equal for all of us. What we're trying to say is, as much as we think we are local, it has a global impact. And we need to appreciate that atmosphere and GHG don't stop at borders. We share this atmosphere as we share this world with each other. So it has to be taken as a holistic view rather than as a national view in that aspect. That is very important. Second aspect is measure to manage. If we don't measure, we cannot manage. And today, the biggest advantage is technology has leapfrogged so much that countries which started with, let's say, cell phone 1G, 2G, are today coming to 5G. But newer countries are straight away going from 3G to 5G, so that all of us are coming together at the same level. Taking that same light, if we put some fairly inexpensive sensors online doing actual measurement in ports and sensitive areas, it would give us a better picture. The subjectivity would go away. It would be actual numbers. And as much as calculations are there have been tests carried out with overflight using drones and fixed sensors against calculations. And it was found that actual concentrations were on the higher side than calculated. So that meaning the calculations were conservative or lower compared to what real concentrations were. So these are observations around the world. We are all learning this together. I think the other thing which is important here is regional cooperation and partnerships. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of methodology and process has been developed in various parts of the world. India can very easily grab those and work with them. And they can come to speed into that education side of it, into understanding their emissions and adopting them. Important is one size does not fit all, meaning what works, let's say in the Port of Houston or Port of Los Angeles or Port of Vancouver, may not work in Mumbai or Chennai or other ports. So they need their own solutions, looking at their own problem, looking at the local wind, climate, that equation, and working it from there. But all stakeholders have to be involved. And I would like to compliment Jairaj by saying there's actually a report out today which says that now there's a concerted effort to reduce brown finance. So brown finance is the one which is towards dirtier technologies or involving technologies where pollutions are higher. So that finance is slowly going to dry up with time. And it's good for us to make that change and leapfrog into today's generation. The other aspect I feel for India especially is, remember we said it's a smog element, it's a GHG element, but it's also a health element. And maybe that education needs to be standardized to understand when somebody has an ailment, what could be the possible causes, comparing them to the local atmosphere and as the impact. As you've heard in New Delhi, because of the smog, we've had cases. In Beijing, we've had cases. California used to have, Los Angeles used to have, till they made very strict legislation. Vancouver is another very nice example. So there is enough learning available there. If we make that effort, I believe there's a good opportunity to work across borders and make life better for the common man, a healthier life. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anuj. Just to clarify, I mean, I think I read somewhere a while back that in United States, there's already a policy and ports have been directed to monitor their emissions on a regular basis. And because they do realize that ports are not just ships visiting them, they are the port vessels, they are trucks and trailers, they are cargo handling equipment, so on and so forth. So I believe in United States, there is already a kind of practice of ports monitoring their emissions and sharing the data and seeing how it is changing over a period of time. Am I right on that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So this is happening in all the major ports in US, and they've identified hotspots and given emission quotas so that even industry which has to expand in these port regions because of the emissions which are there, especially the smog, as we say, low-level ozone, which is very harmful for health, that has been limited so that one cannot expand a factory till they reduce their overall footprint because the quota has been done. So there are various such regimes available, easily available, which can be used and working together. That's why I feel the biggest takeaway would be international cooperation, working across borders, and trying to treat this as a global village problem rather than an individual problem. Because there is a lot of very good research, data, information, process, which has already been developed so that we can share and, we can leapfrog into this rather than step by step.
Sure. Thanks, Anuj. I'd like to ask Jay. Singapore is one port that we all have always admired, as a very modern port, well kept. What kind of policies are they adopting with regards to managing the emissions and so on and so forth? Would you be able to share some insight in that, Jay?
Sure, thanks. Singapore, as general impression is that Singapore is always proactive. Even whenever some regulatory compliance are published by IMO, Singapore takes it as a proactive approach. And as such, even before this compliances for the ships was there and came into the force, Singapore started working even before that. 2018 it came, and even before that, Singapore was there. And the vessel data, when any vessel arriving to Singapore port, they have very big database through AIS, through geospatial data collection, especially for the emissions. And whenever there are new MEPC regulatory or meetings or takes place, there is always somebody who participates in on proactive basis. And with all these informations which they gather from global, whatever is happening, policies are made basically for any country or for any cause. Policies are made on a few factors. For example, how it is going to affect you, that means the country, the people, their living style, as well as their economy, and befitting to their requirement. So I give you a small example. Recently, there was research papers for the emission data were published in Hong Kong as well as in Korea, Incheon. So to make the policies updated, they had collected the data, they used the latest technologies like drones and minimum uncertainties. Some tolerance, whatever minimum is there. And with that, the conclusion of the research made the government bodies or authorities to select those points, and then accordingly the policy is formulated on that particular issue. For example, health issue, noise issue, all these, whatever they already have it, and how finely they can, make it much better. The policies are regulated accordingly. Now coming back to individually for the India, especially for the emissions, policies had been there, but the policies were not assessed the way they should have been. The policies were made on a general basis, like that, okay, smog or pollution around the ports, then your PM particulate matters in the air, not on the deep research basis. That is lagging. We have in India some of the states, they are having their pollution board, maritime board, but the coordination on these particular issues, which has not been seen. So if we go to individually, there is a lot of work to be done. As Anuj says that it's global village. Of course, it is global village. Many countries have come out with the assessment as well as measurements and management and all. It can be the methodology can be borrowed, and that can be made what you need to be done for the Indian context. And it won't take long time the way the other countries have taken, because they started from scratch. But we don't have to start from the scratch. We have base material. We can have the model, proper model, adopt the model, and those activity-based measurements can be taken place, and the database can be prepared up to the level within very short period.
Yeah. Right, Jay. Thanks a lot. What I can understand from you shared is that Singapore certainly is very proactive when it comes to adopting the new regulations and transferring the input into policies at a pretty fast pace, and that it is what helps them in maintaining things. I think Sanjay wanted to share something. Let's hear him out, and I come back to Jairaj for the Indian context again.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sanjay.
So as it was mentioned earlier also, IMO rules do not apply to port area. All port emission comes under the national inventory. In Singapore government has committed to reduce its carbon intensity by a certain percentage. Now, the government has looked at different sectors and given them their target of reduction. So MPA has been given a target of 37% reduction of carbon dioxide intensity. Now, the MPA is looking at all the areas where it can do the reduction. Now comes first the port operation. So electrification of all the cranes and all the other vehicles which are moving the containers and other things. That is one. Then supplying shore power to the ships which are visiting, so that the ships, when they are at port, they do not pollute. Number two. Third, logistic. How do they provide that the trucks are not waiting and polluting before they offload their cargo? That is being done by automation, by fully automated this container movement. Fourth, how to supply or how to make all these. There are almost 20,000 harbor crafts operating in Singapore, in and around the port, small ones. How to electrify them, or if not electrify them, how to provide a less polluting fuel, be it methanol, be it any other fuel, or make it hybrid, or make it. So all these initiatives is going on at present here to look at, and then on a bigger picture, how to make sure that the ships are not waiting here. So MPA has now implementing the just-in-time arrival for the ships. So all these things are not covered by IMO. These are national targets which are handed over, and the same thing will have to be done. Like Mr. Modi has committed to a reduction of 40% of GHG by 2030. Now that has to be given to all the sectors, including these ports. Yeah, and then only ports will put their acts together to come up with the rules and regulations. Then there will be monetization of emission. Unless you do that, unless you reward and penalize, it cannot happen. So that is what is happening in Singapore. I gave you the real example of what is in the port sector, what is happening, apart from the IMO thing, which is covering the vessels over 5,000 gross ton. And none of these vessels are over 5,000 gross ton. So they have to be covered by another regulations. And that is what is being done under this. Thanks.
Thanks, Sanjay. It's extremely valuable what you just shared, because as we all are aware that one of the objectives of IMRC is for each of the sessions that we hold these roundtable discussions, we would publish a white paper and where there would be certain recommendations based on the best practices globally. So in the Indian context, I think it is extremely useful to get these inputs. And let me come to Jairaj now. Jairaj, two things. One is, like Sanjay just shared, that in Singapore, of course, we can always argue that Singapore is like a city, and we are a huge country. Yes, we have our own challenges, how to bring about changes. But let's say in the Indian context, if this has to be, because Maritime India vision already states what it's a vision, but the vision has to now get translated into some real meaningful action plan. And so in the Indian context, who do you think ideally, is it Ministry of Shipping and Ports, or any other body which actually should be the focal point, the center point from where the guidelines should be brought to the ports and other entities and regulated? What is your thought on that, Jairaj?
Pawan, before coming to who has to regulate it, let me just add on to something what Sanjay spoke. The government of Singapore actually provides for gap funding to go green. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a significant cost difference between creating either a hybrid tug or an LNG fuel tug and a fossil fuel run tug, right? So Singapore government has taken on itself to say that we will fund the difference in cost for anybody who's going to go green. And I think that's the way to go about it. rather than to put the onus on operators like us. There is no shortage of plans even in India, Pawan. As you know, we have the Maritime Vision 2030, we have the National Action Plan, and there have been 8 key interventions and 21 green initiatives which have been identified to support the National Action Plan. And of course, the commitments which have been made at COP26 by this thing. But interestingly, I mean, like if you take the National Action Plan, it also includes, apart into the port segment, it says that by 2023, ports should be able to implement just-in-time arrivals. Where is the data? Where is the monitoring? I mean, 2023 is next year, right? We haven't even got started today. It also says port-based initiatives should be given to less polluting vessels by 2023. There is no measurement which is even being done at this moment of time. On the infrastructure, they say battery charging stations to be provided, less polluting fuels for such as LNG, methane, and this thing, that bunkering facilities to be provided. And on the technology front, they say that shore power to be supplied to all. We've hardly got ourselves started on this aspect. So coming to the last this thing, and one more very interesting thing is that in this green initiatives which they have identified to limit GHG emissions from ports, they only talk about major ports in the country, right? Today, close to 45% or even more than 45% of the cargo is handled by the private ports, right? And we as a country has given this this thing that we will reduce the GHG gas emissions by 2030. So it seems to be that at least what the regulator or the possible regulator of government of India, being the shipping ministry, is only talking about the major ports and is not talking about other ports which are also equally important in the country. So there is a lot to get started with awareness. As I mentioned, none of the port authorities, none of the port developers are even aware of what are the requirements by 2030. So whilst there are action plans, there are very, very key action plans which have been, and some of which Sanjay has mentioned. But I think it first has to start with measurement and monitoring of the pollution, this thing in a port, what the ports are doing. Yeah.
Thanks, Jaraj. Actually, what I sense from what you just shared, and I've been yesterday's sessions also on commerce and economy, followed by shipbuilding. I think one sentiment which is running across is that we do set targets. Our problem has been implementation, and that probably seems to be the general case around, but clearly, I think the policies needs to become more actionable. They have to move away from a lofty vision. I mean, certainly you need to have a lofty vision, but come down to some brass tacks, where there is a clear understanding of how we need to proceed from here on. So certainly, I mean, we talked about awareness. There is some kind of awareness, but it still needs to be strengthened. Probably there's a need to have more awareness programs at all levels within the industry for people to understand the seriousness of the situation. When it comes to the policy, India can do a lot by taking the model of what happens overseas and be able to put some clearly identified action plan in place. Yes, there is work to be done, but that needs to come in. If you have to find solutions at this large scale, that is the only way to go forward. Okay, so We come to our third section of our discussion, which is on data. Of course, Jay has already shared some thoughts on data, but let's just try to analyze, let's identify collectively some clear actionable things that we can do to begin with. I know we are saying that we should start to measure first, but let's say even if we have to set systems of measurement in Indian ports, we have to start somewhere for that. So what do you think we should be able to start off with to get the data flowing in so that we can do proper analysis and be able to then take some actions? Let me ask Anuj if he has any thoughts in this front. And then we
Thank you
continue.
so much. Thank you, Pawan. I was getting excited looking at the wonderful comments of Jairaj and Sanjay and Dr. Jay. I just put in the chat session epa.gov Ghg Emissions. Why I'm trying to say that is, it says, do you know what your household's carbon footprint is? And then it says, what is GHG? Where does it come from? Look at it at a global, national, facility, and individual. And it breaks it down right there in very simple formats for them to read. Remember, India has two challenges. One is we still have folks who are trying to get from under the poverty line to above the poverty line. So there's that lower middle class to middle class. There's that upgrade happening. So the per capita GHG footprint is increasing and will continue to increase. So as new folks come into that stream, and the existing ones, their footprint goes up. This is one big challenge. A second, there is a limitation on capex. How much subsidies can be given? How much financial, easier finance, tax holidays for changing to those? So perhaps we need to look at it in two ways. One way of policy is practices, which are soft practices, which can be adopted at a lower capex cost, but has an equal impact. And there are strategies out there. And the second is we have to come up with a way which rewards the good behavior. Like Jairaj said, what is the incentive for him to build a tug which produces more? Because he's running a commercial enterprise. It has to be sustainable. If his capex is more than is his competitor, then his company makes a lower profit and does not remain competitive in that field. So there has to be that rewarding of good behavior. There has to be that government support. There has to be research in that space. And again, data capture today, like Sanjay said and Jay said, it's relatively cheap. It's easier. Formats are available. Let's capture data, analyze it, work it to local, where you can actually have virtual arrival. If you wanted to adopt virtual arrival, as was spoken, or just-in-time arrival, it can reduce significant emissions at ports. And remember, if we are able to reduce emissions in ports, but that truck takes X number of hours to get out of the port into the roads, that channels are not there, then it sort of defeats the purpose. So there is a supply chain issue, or a supply network issue, as we call it. So it has to be looked at holistically, not piece by piece, and then worked as a strategy. But first is measure to manage and have that commitment from the top at all levels so that we can take it to the next level of implementation.
Thanks, Anuj. Jay, would you like to share some specific points in the Indian context, what could be begun without too much of, because what happens is if we make huge plans, what will happen is it will probably never take off. But I'm talking specifically, Jay, about the data measurement and analysis over here. But could there be some simple solutions that Indian ports could adopt rather quickly and get on with the data measurement and analysis instead of waiting for, some big plans? Any thoughts from your side, Jay?
Yeah, thank you. Surely. Before coming to what you said, I would like to share 2 points with all of you. Just to give you an example, recently United Nations has come out with a big program, and specifically for the awareness and training on ocean pollution, as well as addressing the air and other components also. So the task has been being led by UNESCO and your UNEP. I am a part of it because I am with IOI, International Ocean Institute. So IOI has started specifically to deal with the awareness and education. They have started a virtual academy and to create the simple curriculum for everyone, that means common people. Start right from the scratch, that people, most of the people are, first of all, that thought about the holistic thought about the oceans, that they are most important for our life. Whatever we are talking now, this has got a lot to do with ocean health. If the ocean health is not good, we can do anything, but then once the ocean is affected, the whole, what we say, climate change and warming, seawater warming and sea level rise and all these things. So they have come out with, they have divided the sector-wise, country-wide. I'll be starting from end of the March with that particular mission, and they have sort of created a funds for it. The certification will be, first of all, participation is no fees, zero. It is paid by United Nations. End of the day, people who are attending those sessions, 20 sessions, they will be given a certificate just to make people feel that we have really learned from importance of the oceans. Now coming back to context, addressing the latest issues what we have been talking about, measurement, assessment, and then coming third stage to inventory management. And then when we have the inventory, we have the measurements, then we try to find out the solution, whether they are beyond the parameters, whether they are within the parameters, or they are too good, sort of thing. Simple way to start it, let's start from a point, ground zero if we start. A research work can be undertaken by some researchers, and the vessels which are, say for example, a small port in Gujarat. The people who are appointed there to get the assessment, measurement and assessment of the air quality emissions, whatever vessels have been calling or had been calling, data can be collected. There are many ways to get the data. The ships which are coming regularly, whether it's a bulk carrier, tankers, container vessels, or small crafts also. We keep on getting the data, that means your vessel speed, your power, and then there are modeling is available, algorithms are available. So can create, say for example, 100 vessels. The data are collected. And then your CO2, your SOx, NOx, and particulates matters can be, the data can be created. And with that continuous working on that, we know exactly that nature of the emissions, of the quantum of the emissions taking place at this place. And with that information, we can move around what to do next. So in 3 stages, say given a time of 3 months or 6 months, we have large, there's a lot of work can be done. Port by port, small, larger, the teams can be, educational universities, institutes can be actually taken into the confidence. People, researchers can go with it. And if there is a capacity, then use the latest gadgets, like drones are expensive. To lease those drones expensive. So start in a conventional manner, that you have all the parameters of the ships, fuel, engine type, speed, and all these things. With those algorithms, you create a spreadsheet, and you can start maintaining the data. From there, it can keep on going.
Jay, I think sometime back we were just discussing that there is generally found to be difference in the data which is computed and the one which is measured directly. If I understand correctly, what you are sharing right now is data which will be computed from what we receive from the ships. Of course, one aspect which have to be taken care of is the authenticity of the data, that it is not kind of manipulated. How to confirm that would be the first step. Of course, yes, it's a good idea to start with collecting data from vessels before we implement more expensive methods to measure the data, that could be. But I guess the only thing that comes to my mind is the authenticity of the data, I mean, we are all seafarers. Of course, now systems have become far more transparent, but we all have manipulated the bunker quantities and, I would not call them manipulation, but adjusted them here and there. So I think it will be important, considering the seriousness of the situation, that we get the right data. So that could be a good starting point. Any other thoughts which come to Sanjay, your mind? Yeah, in case what could be done,
I think, see, the progress or the speed, we should not be waiting for data for a few years before we start to, reform our system. And at the same time, I would say we are talking here emission. Now, the data, I can say that the data is available for last 10 years. You all will wonder why I'm saying this. One particular thing which any port always maintains is the fuel consumption, how much they have spent on fuel. Now, how do you use this data or this figure? You can also use the same figure to compute how much of CO2 you must have released by consuming this data. Yeah. So you have that figure. So do that, and you can see that how year on year with your activity, whether you have increased your, I mean, this may not apply to the entire thing, but I'm saying that this is the quickest start by using this. Today, operators like Ocean Sparkle or any other operator, the fuel evaluation is there, but the environmental monetization is not there. The emissions are not. The moment you have contracts where fuel consumption is also a criteria, emission is also a criteria of evaluation. So it's just that not to use the same contracts that has been used, for donkey's years. Come up with contracts or, tenders where the evaluation criteria are different, where you give a separate evaluation on the vessel emissions and penalize or reward for lower emissions. You have it there. That's how you can promote. I mean, I understand when Jaraz talked about gap funding, but gap funding is a start. It's not a sustainable way of doing this. And the sustainable way to do this is to reward or monetize emission reduction. Yeah.
So that's Sanjay, if I may add, Pawan, so I had the privilege of implementing port incentive programs for lower emission ships in at least 10 different ports around the world. And there are very simple, easy programs where you've got to reward good behavior so that there is some incentive for the good actors to work in that space. So it's not a complex picture. It's a fairly easy, simple picture to work it going forward. The other thing is there's some amazing technology out there. So let's take Mumbai, major port, major commercial capital of India. You've got air quality issues there coming out. If you could have emissions from the port where dynamically it is also compounded with the weather, you could actually forecast concentrations of pollutants in the air, which then you can set limits on, which affect the quality of life of people. Because remember, a port is owned by its stakeholders, by the population. It's an interface. Yes, it brings prosperity and everything else, but it's really an interface gateway where the local population are the stakeholders in that. And all the ports are in that space. So there is tremendous technology. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. It's getting that commitment, putting that plan, looking at low capital and high capital, looking at practices, soft practices, and hardware. If you take top 50 ports in India and you put 2 sensors per port, just 2 sensors, you're looking at 100 sensors. It is nothing, as in the CapEx point of view. But put it online, keep it as open data, and you've now got a stream of life data for everybody to work with, just as an example.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anuj. Very valuable inputs. Let me come to Jairaj. Jairaj, I just wanted to ask you, of course, we are talking about right now, we talked about the awareness, and we said, okay, there should be policies to bring about some actionable plans. And yes, data collection analysis is one of the important aspects of the whole thing. But while we are waiting for, let's say, these things to happen from the authorities, do you find a company like yours, which operates such a large number of vessels in the Indian ports, motivated enough to start managing your own data in the meantime? Okay, one argument could be, how does it matter? I mean, because I'm not the only person who's polluting. But let's say while we wait for policies and governments to make the changes, would there be any incentive for your organization to start doing it? Yeah.
So, Pawan, first let me.
Okay.
No, it's not difficult. First, let me retort to what Sanjay mentioned about incentives and reward system. Incentive and reward is after you get into the contract, right? To get into the contract itself, if this is not a criteria that it is evaluated, right, you will be left standing thinking that you're going to do good, and if you're not going to get into the contract. So incentive and reward is after getting into the contract and not before this thing. So having said that, Pawan, to your this thing about how companies like us, as I said, we have actually taken a lot of initiative, because I must honestly admit, it is not because we are holier than thou, but it is because we are getting under immense pressure from banks, financial institutions, private equity investors, that we are trying to do something about it, to this thing. So whilst you may say, monitoring and this thing, leaving aside that, I think we have also shown interest in how direct, there is no doubt that we are polluting far beyond what 2030 is asking us to do. So some actionable points which can be easily implemented by companies like us, like for example, instead of using fossil fuel, which is coming from the oil wells and so on, there are fossil fuels which are coming from agricultural waste, right? And which can be directly used without major modifications to our engines and so on. And we are actually working on one such proposal where we are using biofuel. This is not blended fuel. This is 100% biofuel. It is, brings carbon neutrality. It is not a carbon zero fuel, carbon neutrality to this. So whilst we still strive to get into hybrid tugs, electric tugs, LNG fuel tugs, which have a cost implication, in the interim, we are trying to see how to implement using bio fuel in our tugboats, number one. Number two is, I'm sure all ports are talking about it, to use shore power when you're not doing this thing. Yes, very much practical, but still it has to come from the ports that they are going to give me. And why would I not do it as an operator, which reduces the running hours of my generators and so on, right? Next is, of course, I mean, other this thing like material handling equipment, electrical battery operated material handling equipment in ports, and extensive use of renewable energy. And as I said, one of the key green initiatives what the ministry or the government has identified is increased share of renewable energy to greater than 60% across major ports. This is not something only what the major ports have to implement. I think across the this thing that both major and private ports have to implement. This is some direct this thing how ports can contribute to reduction in GHG. And the other way is to support shipping in reduction of GHG emissions. One is, as we talked about, use increased efficiency methodologies to do ship tracking, and so that it promotes. And I think this just-in-time arrivals is a big thing which can reduce the GHG gas emissions significantly. Then create infrastructure in the ports for bunkering of either low or zero hydrocarbon fuels. This needs to be done, because even in an LNG terminal, if we want to run LNG fuel tugs, we need to have bunkering facilities for these this thing. And once again, lastly, of course, monitoring of the emissions from vessels in port and incentivizing those which have lower emissions. This thing. Yeah.
Since I have spent a lot of time in training in my career, I would like to ask you, within your system, have you implemented some training programs for your staff down the line, which helps in letting them know the seriousness of the situation and what they can do in their individual capacities while we are waiting for something major to happen? Has something been done in your organization so far?
Honestly, not, Pawan, but very soon we have to get into it. And everybody knows in the company and in this thing, at least in the head office, how serious this issue about environmental ESG is. We are a company which is largely supported by private equity, and we go through diligences so very frequently. And today we see that there are specific diligence teams which are coming to do ESG compliance. So we have no way out of it. Would be happy to. We have always, been a company which this thing to training and getting our people up to date. Would be happy to do that. And in fact, in the chat box, Jagmeet wrote that he will be able to implement a monitoring and measuring this thing for us, at the various ports that we operate. Surely we'll have to look at it, but obviously we have to use this data for a commercial benefit, which will come to us for sure. Sure. Otherwise, just training, just measuring without the buy-in from the ports is not going to benefit.
Yeah. Thanks, Jaraj. Actually, your inputs have very smoothly moved us into the fourth section of our discussion today about the implementation technologies and other methods, And here we're going to tap on a lot of experience that Sanjay brings along with him. So Sanjay, I'm going to start with you. There are some short-term measurements, let's say up to 2030, and then of course the long-term measurements to meet the targets. I would like you to share your experience as you kind of interact with entities across the globe. And also, how judiciously are people actually selecting technologies and methods? Because all organizations, there are commercial interests around, which are all over the place. And even selecting a particular methodology, ideally the entity should be doing a thorough study of what is most suitable in the environment, in the situation. So what is the experience about selection? What are the various methodologies available, short-term and long-term? We would like to hear from you, and then maybe we can ask others to come. Sanjay, all yours.
Yeah, thanks, Pawan. So when we talk about this IMO 2030 or 2050, we are moving away from the port. We are moving to the global shipping as such. So the moment we come there, it is, if you don't comply, you cannot operate. So it's as simple as that. Now, there is one thing about, if you look at these regulations, the first is EEXI, which is for the existing vessel to comply with a design requirement. So it is a one-off, and you pass that, and then your ship is okay. However, the following is the CII, which is your carbon intensity, and that has to gradually reduce over the years for IMO to reach its 2030 ambition or 2050 ambition. Okay, and that is 40% reduction by 2030 compared to 2008 levels. Yeah. Now this creates a much more problem for you. So there are two ways to reach lower carbon. That is, either you go the fuel way, or you improve the efficiency of the vessel, that you consume less and less fuel. Yeah. So every ton you consume a fuel is 3 tons or 3+ tons of carbon dioxide. It's a very simple formula, and that is why I was talking earlier when I said the port has the data available. So here, what you are looking at 2030, you cannot meet 2050 ambition level without a zero carbon or a carbon-free fuel. So that ambition has to be met with the development of green fuel availability. Now, 2030 levels, again, it is a very important question to see that how much do I spend on this vessel to meet that requirement. There are technologies available, whether you call it propulsion improvement technologies, or flattener rotor, or air lubrication, or air kites, or sails, fixed sails. There are so many of these available where the benefits can be ranging from 5% to 15% or 20%. So, but they come with a capex charge. So you have to look at how old is your vessel? What is your plan with the vessel? How long are you going to run it? You have to take all this into account before you select something. Or, some owners will have a stepwise approach. That, if you know IMO, they have these 5 ratings, rating A to E, and if you are in D rating for 2 years, then you have to come up with a plan to implement. So we foresee in future there will be a multi-tier charter market as well. You see, there are customers like IKEA and customers like Amazon, who are very vocal about it, that they don't want to use a ship which is polluting. They want a zero carbon ship. Yeah. Their goods to be transported. So they are willing to pay. They are willing to pay that extra premium which comes with a greener fuel. Yeah. So similarly, the customer will be driving the shipping towards cleaner fuels and lower pollution. Charterers will carry the voice of the customers. You see, and even if you have a major polluter like BHP, which is mining, they have their agenda to be carbon neutral by 2040 or 2050. So this transportation of their cargo by the ship is also part of that scope of carbon emission. So they are looking for ships, and very recently, last week only, the first of the LNG-driven Capesize has come. So these Capesize, which will be carrying BHP cargo, will be. So there are ways, and it's always good to improve the efficiency of your vessel so that you consume less energy to do the same transport work, because in future the fuels are going to be expensive. So in the best case is to use less fuel. So 2030 targets you can reach by energy efficiency devices, but 2050 you have to go with a cleaner fuel, be it ammonia, be it methanol, hydrogen, unlikely for the kind of long-range ocean-going ships, but we see that methanol and ammonia will play a large role, and so is bio LNG, which is mixed with LNG, then taking it forward. Yeah. So
thanks, Sanjay. Yeah, that's very interesting, actually. Any thoughts from Anuj, Jairaj, Jay on this?
Thank you. Thank you, Pawan. So, Sanjay, I absolutely agree with you that CII is going to be the carbon intensity indicator is going to be the key factor. And like today, you get freight rates which are quoted for a bulk carrier as a regular freight rate, and then one which is fitted with a scrubber. And there's a price differential. Similarly, there will be a price differential. Alternatively, the way Europe is going is that there would be a emissions trading scheme where there will be a certain amount of fee payable per ton emitted, which would then compensate for a more efficient vessel. So a vessel will actually pay less comparatively to a C vessel, and definitely D&E will. There's supposed to be a huge amount of. Actually, 80% of vessels are supposed to be affected by 2028 under the CII as the reductions go as per current IMO plans. The reason I say current IMO plans, as much as those plans are there, remember, shipping is a service. And it's the consumers of shipping, the industries, which are moving at a much faster pace, while shipping as a service is not moving at that pace. And this is perhaps one of the criticisms which is going against IMO, that it's dragging its feet compared to other areas where there needs to be more proactive, because again, it's a service. And if the consumer is willing to pay, like you correctly said, the likes of IKEA, Amazon, Walmarts and others, then the customer is demanding it. It's the younger generation today who have that disposable income, who are forcing, they're willing to not speak with their mouth, but with their wallets, with their money, with their credit cards. And that is changing behavior. So we need to change on the shipping side in that space to make that happen. That is perhaps one key factor. Second, technologies will come, but we have to embrace technologies. And we cannot, in shipping, always be regulatory driven. We cannot say that we will do that, just comply with the regulation. That cannot be a base. There has to be something called best management practices. We have to rise above that bare minimum flow. To me, that is a big challenge which shipping has. Other industries have that. While in shipping, we still seem to be largely adopting that, which is causing the users of shipping, the customers of shipping, are not so happy about it. See, the finance side is now changing it completely, and they're going to pull purse strings on it the way they want this going. EU has already said they expect the ETS to look at somewhere around $200 per ton of CO2. That's where they feel the incentive will be enough for people to put in a more efficient engine. So the other, factors where ports are concerned, where vessels are concerned, there are some low-hanging fruit, but we cannot wait and sit on the side and say, when the regulation comes out, then I will do something. There are companies implementing ESG today. Remember, the E of the ESG is environmental. And it's the boards who are requiring it. I mean, a company like Exxon, the largest, in our time, oil companies, these were the ones, they were the king of the oil companies, right? Exxon. And shareholder activism got 3 directors on the board, which then made them change their policies. So companies are adopting from board and pulling it down. And when you're talking about costs in this aspect, remember there's a sustainability element. There is a profitability element in this, because as your emissions come down, as there's better governance, as there's better workforce and improved sustainable practices, they improve productivity, they improve output. So this misnomer needs to be cleared out so that companies can adopt and actually increase their profitability. Where companies are concerned, where ships are concerned, there are practices, there are low-hanging fruits, like you identified. You can't change the hull of a ship if it's really old, but there should be alternate finance, there should be availability to either phase that out. In Singapore, they do not allow older cars, right? Your COE expires and those cars are defunct. Those are the policies we need to work on. There is opportunity. Believe me, there's a huge opportunity in India today to embrace and run with this, because there is technology, there is the software side, there seems to be a will coming in it. We just need that impetus, that starting point to work it forward.
Thanks, Anuj. Thank you so much. Actually, it's 11:26. I would just like to ask the convener if we go a few minutes extra, is it all right?
Yeah, sure. Okay, we can go a few minutes, and then we also have some Q&A from the panelists.
Yeah,
which we
exactly. So that's why I wanted Dr. Ananta to share some of his thoughts before we invite the questions, and maybe then we can sum it up. Dr. Ananta, all yours. You've been listening.
Thank you, Pawan.
Yeah.
One, for roping me in as assimilator, and I'm very happy the way you have conducted it and the way the panel members have answered the questions. And I did not want to interrupt, so I thought let the flow go through all the 4 sections of questions you had prepared for. Okay, awareness, policies, data, and implementation. But as the expert members started dilating on the questions, on the answers, some questions have come to my mind. I just, what I've noted here, Dr. Jai Acharya brought in the role of the Pollution Control Board for the implementation in his mention there. And Anuj had talked of the incentive of why those tugs should be propelled with LNG and not the conventional fuel, and why therefore they were losing the contract because the port was not concerned with reducing pollution, but with only, of course, looking at their account books and profit, which is natural. Yes. Now, on one hand, we have said that the Prime Minister has committed to 40% reduction of the greenhouse gas emission by 2030, which is indeed a tall order. And the maritime sector also has to help in achieving this by bringing down our pollution levels. So I was thinking that there are often some contradictory happenings, that while the port may have the heart to do it, they are not allowed to do it. Mainly because it seems that when it comes to enforcement, they seem to be sitting on different sides. And I tell you that I feel that this is a very serious lacuna in our Indian system. We should first incentivize the entire community, the stakeholders, the government, of course, that everyone is on the same side because the objective is common. Therefore, one cannot be against the other. Therefore, my question is, when it comes to enforcement of these very laudable ideas and proposals we have put forth, and how in Singapore it happens, but in India it cannot happen, or in a particular port in India cannot happen, it can happen in Gujarat. I think we have got a very strong point to address. And I would like the esteemed panel members, whoever it is, to please come out with what is a solution to that, because otherwise we are talking big, but what would happen to it? It is not a good thing. Again, Anuj also mentioned, finally, the port belongs to the people, right? Anuj, I hope I'm not misquoting you. If that were to happen, then it should be everybody's interest to bring up this control of pollution, this reduction of greenhouse gas emission, of using better methods, monitoring better, and all these things. It's interesting because Jairaj also mentioned that we are not holier than thou. Okay, so the fact remains that if you were not compelled to do it, you wouldn't be doing it. Definitely, while the compulsion must be there, and of course, Anuj again mentioned that people unilaterally do it according to best management practice. But I think we have to educate our entire community. And I would like the panel members to please answer this, or at least make a few remarks, whether I am out of sync, or is there a possible recommendation that this panel could send in the white paper? Please.
So, sir, sorry, I'm taking this. I'm very passionate about this. I worked with a lot of ports into this space. And the fear ports have when they move towards reducing their emissions or being sustainability side is that their costs will become too high and they will not remain profitable. And then the competitor ports will take on and it will become a problem for them. We can quote you so many ports who have adopted and the market has rewarded them. Port of Quebec in Canada is worth looking up as a story. Port of Vancouver is worth reading as a case study. You've got a small port like Port Prince Rupert up north on the Pacific side. It's a small port, and see how much it has changed and grown by adopting these policies. Market rewards. Remember, port is a gateway. If the industry as customers of a port want it, if the stakeholders want it, then it happens. It's just a gateway how that, which is being handled and managed. So that to me is very important. The second factor, like you said, is level playing field. There cannot be preferred folks. There cannot be two level. There cannot be us and them. It is everybody us. There has to be a level playing field. Jurisdiction, that's why one of the key ways of bringing this is transparency. And that's why I mentioned about the sensors and putting those sensors, putting them in the public domain so that information is available, whether it's good or bad, it's available to everybody to see. And that transparency brings in accountability, which creates a level playing field.
Right.
So that to me is key because like Jairaj said, he wants to do better. There's a competitor issue. He's got a financier issue. He's running a business. It's not a social enterprise. He has to show results. So if he adopts sustainability practice, he needs a level playing field where good actors would get rewarded. Thank you, sir. I'm sorry.
Just a remark that I'm happy you quoted many international ports outside India, of course. I wish that would prevail or that will be brought into at least some of our ports as a matter of, I don't know how. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Anuj. Thank you, Dr. Ananta. I think we are ready to take a few questions if they are in the chat box. Yogita, can you help us out, please?
Yeah, certainly. So just to let everyone know, if you have a question, please raise your hand and we can unmute you for you to ask, or you can always post on the chat box. I have some questions that were sent to me directly. This question is for Mr. Jairaj, the first one. Understand that Indian ports pushed ethanol blending in marine fuels for tugs without much research, and many tug engines got damaged. So is this accurate?
Yogita, I'm not sure about this use of methanol, but blending with biodiesel has been used, not only in tugboats, but also in coastal vessels. But still, the blending is very small percentage, is less than 20%. So I'm not aware whether there have been a large-scale damage of marine engines because of the use of methanol.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think this question is already answered by Mr. Sanjay Verma in the chat box, but still let me read it out loud for everyone. While measures are being taken by PSA to reduce emissions in Singapore port, ample emissions are being released by the refineries across the southern tip of Singapore from Indonesia. So the end result, the measures taken may not amount to much until something is done from across the strait. A global effort is definitely the need of the hour, and how does one make that happen? So, Mr. Sanjay Verma, would you like to say anything, add anything to it, or should I just read your comment here?
You can read my reply.
Yeah. Okay, sure. So yeah, so just to share it with everyone, one should not stop the good work by one sector just because another sector is polluting. And every sector has its own target to reduce its carbon footprint. So I'm sure the polluting refineries will have their own targets to meet. So that was the answer. Would anybody like to add anything to this?
I think what Sanjay has said is absolutely right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
If our doing good is subject to somebody else, facilitating that, then there is an issue with our own value systems. I think it has to go deep into what we believe in, and we do that irrespective of what others are doing around.
Right.
Yeah.
So another question we have is to the full panel: is the industry in general happy with the IMO CI formula being applied for ships to give ratings to ships? If formula itself is partial, how efficiency measures can they help?
Sanjay, would you like to respond to this with whatever?
Yeah. I mean, the person who has written this question, thanks a lot. See, the thing is, it is going to get tougher. Don't think that it's going to get lighter in any case. And this is the only way your carbon intensity of a particular vessel can be classified. And then, of course, as it was discussed in the panel earlier, there will be a multi-tier market in future where better ships will have priority or better charter rates, and the ships which are polluting, either they have a short lifespan or they will have to be scrapped because they will not remain charter worthy. And fuel efficient technologies, again, there are questions whether I just meet my EEXI by doing a EPL engine power limitation, or I should use some energy efficiency devices as well. Now, the cheapest and easiest way is to meet your design requirement by reducing your power. But then, is your vessel, because that will limit your speed, and does your vessel remain worthy for being chartered or not? So it's always better to improve the efficiency and then apply a little bit of EPL rather than go for massive EPL and just. So it's a short-term solution, but very short-sighted solution as well.
Right. Mr. Jagmeet Makkar has shared some comments and a link which all of you can visit. It's about I'll just read aloud his comment for everyone. Not only financiers through Poseidon principles, but also the marine insurers are adopting principles to decarbonize shipping. So it's a good reference material for everyone here to read out. There is one, Dr. Bharadwaj would like to ask a question. Sir, I'll just unmute you. Please see if you're able to unmute us. Yeah.
Hi, wonderful panel discussion. Mr. Jarraj, you were mentioning that there is this trial which has happened on coastal vessels about the biofuel blending, and ethanol. I think ethanol was used, and the report came that not much. There is a 7% reduction in the GHG, but they claim that on a life cycle GHG, there is a large scale reduction. But Gerald sir, when we talk about life cycle analysis, it is not just a life cycle GHG. We are talking about the complete environmental burden on a life cycle analysis. So are we talking about the land usage? Are we talking about the kind of pollutants which happen during the processing of ethanol? Are we talking about so that in a life cycle analysis is a complete burden, not just GHG.
Agree with you totally on that, sir. I think even when I spoke about biofuel, which is carbon neutral, extracted out of agricultural waste, and when I attended some of these webinars, what was told to me is that you can't consider this carbon neutral fuel, because you got to get into this thing to say how much GHG emissions have been emitted in bringing this agricultural waste to the facility which is converting it into hydrocarbon fuel. But while we do agree, but on that principle, but undoubtedly, if you use the fuel which is being extracted out of agricultural waste, it may not be completely carbon neutral, but to the extent at least you are making a start. If we start thinking about trying to say that let us compute from ground zero to wherever we are reaching, whether carbon neutrality or reduction is being achieved, we will not start anywhere. So we need to start somewhere, and I think this blending is a very, very small percentage, as you mentioned, 7% or on. I think there are better technologies, better this thing. And what I mentioned to you, that this biofuel is being used extensively on the land-based industries and can be easily. The only issue here was that the flashpoint was less than 60 degrees, and we are working with them to see how we can get to comply with that greater than 60 degrees flashpoint fuel. We are eager to try this out, and I'm sure in the next few months, we will definitely take those steps.
Captain Bhardwaj, I was going to say, so there are two steps. You see, one is you're making your existing operation more efficient by using biofuels, by improving the engine efficiency, better monitoring, better practices in that space. On the second side, there are new nascent technologies which are working on the side. And those technologies, although they haven't matured to maritime, but they are coming into that space soon. So the philosophy that we can't sit back and wait for them to come and then we will change. I applaud Jairaj that at least we're doing something, we're making that effort, those small steps, while bigger industries. I mean, I can share with you, there are today non-weapon grade nuclear reactors, micro-nuclear reactors, which are being put for testing on ships. They're already being tested in rail, by the way. And they have 3-year fuel life cycle, and they're being tested on rail already, and they're going to be tested on ships. You've got hydrogen fuel cells which are going into that ship. So our fuel cycle, our energy cycle is changing. And if, as vessel designers, as Professor Ananta and the others, can make a vessel energy agnostic, meaning it doesn't care where the power is coming from. It's an electric drive, which is totally power agnostic as to the source of the energy coming. That is perhaps the ship of the future, because that's going to change as we know it with all the inventions coming in. And how that will change, especially with the autonomous shipping coming in, we don't know that cycle as well. There are two concepts: that ships will run completely autonomous, or there will be a chain, a caravan effect where one of those vessels will be manned, but the other 2 or 3 may not be. So various technologies are being tested at this time, and we need to make these baby steps and start that process, start on that journey to take us forward in that space. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions, Yogita, or we
No,
could...
so actually, no, we don't have any more questions. Just one question someone has asked. This is for me. Is it possible to have video of valuable talks? So for just to let everyone know, all of these videos are available on our website and on our YouTube channel. I have just left our email address. If you're unable to find them, you can drop us an email, but you will find them all on our website for later reference. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Yogita. Okay. Gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank each one of you for a wonderful contribution. And I think we all have learned a lot. We have, shared our thoughts, and I'm sure that this will be the case with our esteemed participants also. Just a few thoughts which come to my mind. Very recently, in a social media, some newspaper cutting of about 70-year-old newspaper was making rounds, and somebody had talked about the excessive use of coal in the industries at that point of time and how it is going to affect the environment and so on and so forth. I'm quite sure it was an authentic newspaper cutting. But the fact is, as human beings, it's not that we are not aware of certain things. From time to time, that information, that knowledge comes to our in front of us. Whether we act upon them is a question. Even when the fossil fuels were first discovered, I'm sure, as long as the utilization of fossil fuels was within limits, things kind of remained good, Now, of course, we are talking about different fuels, renewable energy. We are talking about bioenergy. What probably we'll come to know down the line is that if we start to consume even too much of biofuel, then the whole process of creating biofuel may start to create imbalance in some other part of the globe. So somewhere down the line, I think what matters is the whole idea actually is emerged from the Sustainable Development Goals. Somewhere probably globally, when they brought about the SDGs in 2015, there is a realization which is coming in that as human beings, we need to live more consciously. We are all here for a certain period, maybe 70, 80, 90 years, just about 27 to 30,000 days that we live. How we live, it matters. And are we living a conscious life where, when you look at sustainability, it is the environment, it is the society, and it is the economics. Are we able to strike a balance between these 3 key aspects of sustainability? If we can, probably we would not create an imbalance which will, make us run helter-skelter at some point of time of finding solutions. Because then we'll find some short-term solutions which will create an imbalance somewhere else, and so on and so forth. But wherever we are right now, I think it's a matter of great seriousness. If we believe whatever is circulated around is not some Western world which is trying to create more difficulty for the developing economies and so on and so forth, or they did so much for so many years, and now when we are growing and becoming more stable, they want to implement regulations which are going to impede our growth and so on and so forth. I mean, as most of us are seafarers, when you face adversity out in the middle of the ocean, it is deck, engine, catering, they all roll up their sleeves and come on deck, all hands on deck. And that is the time we don't think who belongs to which department, because it is our survivability, which is in question at that point of time. So unless we start to think and believe that whatever is happening may at some stage, what we saw the video right in the beginning, I mean, some countries may just cease to exist. Some coastal cities may just cease to exist after some time, So unless we bring in that seriousness, which of course will come through a lot of dissemination of knowledge in all entities, irrespective of whether we are from government or regulators or private enterprise, awareness needs to be brought in. And we hope that we will all collectively do that. So with that, I would once again like to thank all the panelists, my colleague, Dr. Ananta, who's the assimilator, and hopefully we'll all, I think the white paper that we develop out of this discussion, we hope to reach it across to all concerned people who hopefully can bring about some meaningful change around. So once again, thank you all and have a good evening, good night, and good day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to
everyone
see
so
all
much.
of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Yeah.
Right, so I'll just be stopping live streaming, and just to conclude, we are having our next session at 2:30 p.m. Indian time, which is going to be on ports and logistics. It will focus on the new act and the new landlord model, and I'm sure sustainability will become an even bigger topic with the new changes coming in. So do join us on the same Zoom link at 2:30 p.m. And thanks to everyone who attended and to the esteemed panel moderator and assimilator. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.